Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our College of Graduate Studies webinar today. I'm hoping all of you can hear me. Looks like you can. Today we will be discussing academic and professional writing. Our webinar will be moderated by Dr. Thomas Moriarty, a professor of writing and rhetoric in the Department of English and Comparative Literature, who also serves as the director of the Writing Across the Curriculum program. Dr. Moriarty works closely with graduate student writers and trains faculty to better support graduate student writing across the disciplines at San Jose State University. He will be a presenter today along with his colleagues, Michelle Hager, who is the director of the Writing Center, Amy Russo, who is the coordinator of the Multilingual Writing Support Services branch of the Writing Center, and Dr. Steph Frazier, the chair of our Linguistics and Language Development Department. This webinar is being recorded and will be closed captioned. We have turned off your chat feature. You are welcome to post any questions you have for our moderator or other presenters in the Q&A section available at the bottom of your webinar screen. My name is Cheryl Cowan, and I'm an associate with the College of Graduate Studies. My colleague, Julia Dunn, is an enrollment specialist at the College of Graduate Studies. And together we will pose your questions out loud for a response. This will allow our closed captioner to transcribe your questions. We request that you hold off asking questions until the end of the discussion, since many of your questions might be answered during the presentation. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask that Tom turn on his. There we go.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Cheryl. And welcome everybody onto the webinar. We really appreciate you joining us today for our, session on academic writing and writing as a graduate student at San Jose State University. The way we're going to run this is I'm going to quickly introduce my fellow panelists so they can turn their cameras on briefly for a second so they can see what we look like. And then when it comes time for each of us to talk, I'll give them a slightly longer introduction. And each of us will talk for about maybe 10-15 minutes. And like Cheryl said, if you have any questions, please pose them in the question feature. And our moderators, along with me, will help kind of sort through them, and then we'll ask them to all the panelists once everybody's had a chance to present. So let's give this a go. Before I present what I have to show you, I'd like to give you a chance to meet sort of face-to-face the panelists who are here with me. With me is Dr. Steph Frazier from the Linguistics and Language Development Department. He's the chair of that department, and he joins us from beautiful San Jose, California. Hi, Steph. Hello. Also with us on the panel is Michelle Hager, who is the director of our University Writing Center, who joins us from beautiful rural Gilroy, California.
Yes, hi everyone. Good to see you today, virtually.
And finally, we have Amy Russo, who is the multilingual coordinator in our Writing Center as well. And I'm pretty sure she's joining us from beautiful Fremont, California.
Lovely here in Fremont.
All right, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. I have the great honor of giving you the first little bit of information, so I will do that right away. I'm going to share my screen over here. Excellent. And then I will talk you through what I have for you. I will also turn off my camera so you don't have to stare at me while I'm looking at my screen over here. All right. I'm going to be talking with you just for a couple of minutes about writing as a graduate student writer at San Jose State University. Kind of give you a basic idea of how to maybe orient yourself to thinking about all the writing that you're going to be doing at San Jose State. Now, as a graduate student at San Jose State, which I think is very good news, you might disagree with me, is you get to do a whole bunch of writing in your 2 or 3 or 4 years that you're going to be spending with us at San Jose State. My fancy screen is, there we go. All the different types of writing that you're going to be doing as a graduate student here include such things as lab reports, class papers, theses and dissertation proposals, and then the actual theses or dissertations that most of you will be writing, or projects in your different programs. You'll also have the opportunity to write conference papers, abstracts, progress reports, and more. And I know you're thinking, that's not good news at all. Who am I trying to fool? And the reason why is because writing is hard. There is no writing pill. There's endless rules and expectations, and the rules change based on the situation that you are writing in. So how we write on the job, and I know many of us in graduate school are working for companies and are currently employed, it's different from how we write in graduate school. And also how we write in graduate school is different from how we wrote as undergraduates. And then all of us somehow seem to forget much of what we've learned and much of what we might actually be very good at when we're faced with these new and challenging writing tasks. And this is especially true when we move from professional and workplace forms of writing to the more academic forms of writing that we do in our disciplines in school. Now, why do we forget these things? There are these poor souls in my discipline of writing and rhetoric who study the transfer of writing skills. They look at, what do people transfer from one task to another? Or what can they transfer from learning in one class to another, or to a project to another project? And what they have found is that writers need cues and reminders, excuse me, to activate previous writing knowledge and to apply them to new contexts. They've also found that every new context requires some new skills. So we are never coming to graduate school or any task or any class even fully prepared and ready to go. So good luck. Not really. There's actually a lot of things that we can do to be successful writers in graduate school, given this kind of situation that we find ourselves in. Number one, and I encourage you to start thinking about this from your very first class with us here in graduate school, is we can think about the ways we write in our disciplines as unique genres with unique rules and expectations and processes for producing those genres. And those rules and expectations and processes, they're learnable through practice and discussion with our instructors and also our fellow colleagues who are going to be in our classes with us. So every time that we approach a writing opportunity, I like to call them writing opportunities, we can think about and articulate the expectations of the genre. We can think about both the substantive and the stylistic features of the genre, like how do people write in this field? Or what do people in this field research? What kinds of research designs do they use? What kinds of things do they study? And how do they study those things? And when you collect data in an engineering lab, what counts as good data versus if you're doing library research for your English thesis? What counts as good data or ideas? Also, we can think about how do people write in this field? How do we make our arguments? How do we contextualize our work? What citation systems are we expected to use? And also, very importantly, we can think about the processes that people in our fields use to produce texts. How do people do research? How do they come up with the data? How do they analyze the data? What are the typical processes for writing texts in particular genres? A lot of us sort of think maybe we write from start to finish. Well, nobody in graduate school writes from start to finish if you're writing an article or a paper. We tend to write it from the inside out. In your engineering course or your science course, you're going to write your methods first. Then maybe your findings after you have some findings, and then your analysis, and then you're going to go back and write your introduction. And these are the things that we can think about when we're faced with these new genres. We can also think about learning to write as being similar to learning how to play a sport, which means we learn how to write in new genres in process while we are doing it. So just like an athlete, we can't just watch film and then jump into a game and expect to succeed. We can't watch Steph Curry hit from downtown, for 3 hours and then step out on the court and expect to be able to do the same. And nor can we just run drills. So I'm going to bounce the ball, keep bouncing the ball, and then get in the game and expect to succeed. But just like an athlete, we can stop and listen to our coaches, our teachers in process as we write real documents for real audiences. And that's one of the reasons why in very many of your courses, you're going to have a lot of writing assignments, is because your professors know that that's how you're going to learn how to be a good technical writer, or that's how you're going to learn how to write articles in anthropology, is by doing it. And as you're doing it, they can blow the whistle and say, now hold on, Tom, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that and see if it works better? Another thing we can do in our classes as graduate students, we can always ask for samples and examples. We can ask our professors, what are the expectations for these genres? And can you talk to us in that way? Can you tell us the usual stuff about length, format, audience, purpose, and so on? But can you also maybe use this genre analysis guide that's always available from the Writing Across the Curriculum program to help us think about how do we go about making new knowledge in this discipline, and how do we share it with all the different audiences? We can also see our writing as a recursive iterative process, which means it happens in kind of a messy way. It goes back and forth with starts and stops. It doesn't just happen in a linear, simple, I start writing, I'm done, and now I stop. We can break assignments and projects down into parts and also phases. And we can work on the different parts in whatever order makes the most sense to us, in whatever order makes us the most productive. So for example, you don't have to write the introduction first. It's always easier to write your intro last, because then you know what you're introducing. It might make sense to write your things inside out, so to speak. That there is your recursive iterative process down at the bottom. What you see in the middle is this linear process that we all wish writing was, but unfortunately it's not. And instead, the real writing process is what you see down there at the bottom. Another thing we can do as graduate student writers is we can make use of every opportunity to get feedback on our writing. A lot of people find writing to be a very lonely, solitary activity, and it's not. We can get feedback on everything we write, and even parts of what we write. We can get that feedback from our instructors. We can get that feedback from our peers and colleagues in class. And we can get that feedback from what I always think of as our super peers, mainly writing center tutors. The reason why you should do this as a graduate student writer and as any form of writer is because the most productive writers do two things. They regularly share drafts and partial drafts with instructors and their peers, and then they also understand that writing is an iterative, recursive process. It's not a one-shot thing, and it's not linear. Finally, I'd like to encourage you, make use of all the writing support resources on campus. You're going to be learning more about all the different writing support resources that are available for your time on campus. And I really encourage you to make use of them. You can meet with your instructors for content and organizational feedback. You can meet with your peers for the same thing, and also correctness feedback, both formally and informally. You can form your own writing groups if you'd like. And finally, you can work with our Writing Center, which is a fabulous, wonderful resource that you're going to learn a lot more about, and other super peers to give you all kinds of feedback. So thank you very much, and welcome to San Jose State. I am now going to stop sharing this. Pop back in here so I can see you live, and now introduce the next panelists. We are going to hear from next Michelle Hager and Amy Russo. All right, so Michelle and Amy, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
So Amy is going to share our screen and get us started here.
Okay. Here we go. So we're going to be really building on what Tom has to say. how do you start this process? How do you join your community of graduate writers? This is something that you can start doing from your very first day of school. First, I just kind of want to talk about why do we write at the graduate level? This is actually one of the most exciting parts for me as both a writer myself, but also someone who works with other writers, is that all of us have come to school to either join a new industry, to do creative expressive works. Maybe you want to start a new business or build new apps. We all come with these dreams and these ideas that we want to add to either academia or industry or business. And writing is how we share those ideas. You can have the best ideas in the world in your head, but if you can't communicate them in a way that people understand, then those ideas lose some of their power. So by coming here to graduate school, you're going to learn this great set of writing skills that you can take with you into whatever company, industry, or business that you want. They're a very transferable set. So to kind of begin with, what is the essence of writing? What is like the spirit of research or creative work? I would like to suggest that you think about the general structure. The what, the so what, and then the now what. The what is always your topic. What are you talking about? But the next thing a writer has to do is show that relevance. The so what is the importance. Why is this topic important? And why is this topic important right now? Why do we need to pay attention to it? Why is it critical? What can it do for us? The now what is the next step. Your research or contribution to the field or to your business should either invent something new or to move the needle, to progress forward, to do something. So you get your audience to understand the topic, then you show them why it's important, and finally, you put in your contribution. What is the next thing that we can do now after you've made your contribution? Let me give you a little bit of a concrete example. So this sentence says, researchers have made strides in the early and accurate diagnosis of Alzheimer's, but those diagnoses have raised a new problem. Should we inform patients at risk while there is no effective treatment available? This one sentence for me kind of encapsulates the spirit of research, this essence. The first part of the sentence introduces the topic, the what. So Alzheimer's disease, where people kind of lose their memories and forget. So researchers now can predict this more accurately. And normally when we think of medical advancement, we think it is always good. Medical advancement equals good, but the topic is more complicated. The second part of the sentence shows that although they can diagnose the problem, there's nothing you could do for the patient. So it's like a quality of life question. So if this was the first sentence of a short, like opinion piece or a report, I would already be interested and invested in the topic because I understand the topics, its importance, and what this debate could possibly bring for this like medical ethical question. So again, as Tom said, we all wish that writing was like this. We started at 0, we progressed through writing, the topics come out perfectly, there's nothing wrong with the grammar, we turn it in, get an A, and everyone understands what we want to say. Alas, writing looks something actually more like this. It's a twisting, winding process that often doubles back on itself. One image I have found helpful from my time as a graduate writer is this. Writing is an iterative process. Just like Tom says, you don't have to write the introduction to the conclusion in the different parts in order, but also you may start with researching and reading. You always start as a reader while you're learning what you can say. You analyze what you write, and then you start drafting. Drafting is just getting your ideas on paper. But as we draft, you'll get feedback from your teachers, from other peers, and then you will change and edit the draft. One tip I would suggest is not making the grammar perfect on your first draft. Yes, grammar is important, but your first draft will probably get changed a lot after you get feedback from your teachers and other peers, and you don't want to lose that work. So yes, of course, try to have good grammar along the way, but save your grammar polishing towards the kind of the second half of your writing process, and realize that you will have many drafts, particularly as you work on writing projects that can span 1, 2, 3 months, even multiple semesters. To kind of help you get started, there's one tool that kind of saved my life as a graduate student. It's called the Pomodoro technique. Pomodoro is Italian for Spanish. Basically, what this says is pick one task you want to do, an actual single task. Set a timer for 25 minutes. It could be a kitchen timer, it could be an app on your phone, it could be a website timer. And for those 25 minutes, you do nothing but the task. So no social media, no talking to your friends, no thinking about what you want to eat for lunch. You just concentrate on that task. After 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break. And after every 4 Pomodoros, you take a longer 15 to 30-minute break. Why this is useful is, like Tom said, we can chunk big projects down into smaller, more manageable pieces. Instead of like, I have to write my whole methods section, you can say, okay, I'm going to work for 2 Pomodoros on that. So that can make it sound much more doable to you, which is really good because you want to try to keep a positive attitude while writing. And you must realize on large scale projects, you're not going to finish it in one sitting. So the Pomodoro technique can both be good to start, but also as a way to track progress during your techniques. And just one example, there's a website called Tomato-Timer, which has the Pomodoro technique built in. There are dozens of these websites, so you can find your favorite websites or your app, or simply a timer on your computer. And these are some tools I would recommend. Now I'm going to pass it back to Michelle, and she's going to tell you more about some graduate writing.
Thanks, Amy. So one of the things that we wanted to focus on during this presentation is how graduate level writing really does differ from the writing that you very likely did in undergraduate, as an undergraduate. And Tom mentioned that earlier. And one of the big differences is that you will be writing very large scale research papers as a graduate student. And they generally contain the different sections that are listed on your screen there. An abstract, an introduction, you have a lit review, methodology, findings, results, discussion, and conclusion. These are things you might have never written before as an undergraduate, and that's perfectly fine. Hopefully some of what our presentation today will do is give you a sense of what these things are. Slide. Thank you. So the first one we want to talk about is the abstract. It appears at the very beginning of the paper, and you've probably seen these if you've looked at any journal articles when you did research as an undergraduate, but the abstract is what appears first. And it's often, if someone else is doing research, it's what they see and read first and skim through to see if they want to use the research that you've done. The abstract is kind of a big picture. It explains the main purpose of your research. It establishes the wider context and kind of creates the niche that your research is filling. It highlights how it's contributing to the field, whatever field you're entering. It does outline your methodologies and your findings. It provides an answer to the so what question. And like Amy mentioned, it's really important to keep demonstrating, why is all of this relevant, what I'm doing here? Why should you care as a reader? And the big thing about abstracts, you really need to keep them short, usually no longer than 200 words. And short, concise writing can be challenging. We have a whole Writing Center workshop on writing scientific abstracts because they can be tough. Okay, next up. Introductions. So, you know, undergrad papers, you probably had some form of an introduction. You're going to have a purpose statement. What are you doing here? You are always going to be addressing some sort of research question. What question is your research answering? And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about research questions a bit later. You're still going to have a thesis. That's the main point of the paper, whatever you're writing. Demonstrating the importance, the relevance, the so what. Provide any context or background that is necessary for your reader to understand what you're talking about. And it does, your intro provides a roadmap for the entirety of your paper. Now, Amy is going to talk a little bit more, in a little bit more depth about what you might do with the introduction.
I'm going to chime back in a little bit to introduce what could be a useful model for you to consider when you're making your introductions. This is called the CARS model, or creating a research space. So when we first open our introduction, so readers are trusting us to kind of be experts in the area we're talking about, that we've done all of our reading, we've done our homework. So our first job is to provide context. So your first move is to establish a claim of centrality. Show why your topic matters to many people. You make some general topic generalizations to kind of bring the readers in, to give them the context necessary to understand what you're going to be talking about. And you also review relevant pieces of previous research to show how your ideas will relate to others that are already in the academic or industry conversation. After you establish your territory, it's time to carve out a niche or a gap that you will then fill. So to establish a niche, you can do a couple different things. You can either make a counterclaim. Maybe research has said A, but you're like, but B could also be helpful. The second thing you can do is to indicate a gap, where you can say, okay, so we know this educational technique works really well in colleges, but does the same research technique work with high school students or middle school students? So you can indicate that there's a gap, something missing in the information, or you can take a topic and raise a question about it to further extend research and ideas that the field is already working with. After you establish your niche, then you have to occupy the niche, or you have to fill the gap. So you have to show how your study will solve or bridge or further contribute to the gap or the niche that you identified. So you do that by either outlining your purposes, or you can announce some preliminary results, or you indicate how your study will fill the gap that you have identified. And this is called creating a research space. Let me give you one example to maybe help illustrate this, admittedly, a little bit of an abstract point. So I will read this. So research has shown that teachers who are enthusiastic and who report high self-efficacy often have highly motivated students. So we look at this first sentence. This is their claim of centrality or their general context. So they're saying that there's been previous research, and then they list the authors, that teachers who are enthusiastic and kind of believe in themselves often have really highly motivated students, and that's our topic. The next sentence begins with a however, which kind of like reverses our expectations. However, little is known about the underlying mechanisms through which teacher enthusiasm and self-efficacy relate to student motivation. So the next sentence is like this surprising point. So although this is important, they're saying that little is known about this relationship. So given the consistent decline in adolescent motivation, there is a need to examine how teachers who are enthusiastic and efficacious successfully motivate their students. So this next sentence, its job clearly illustrates a need, a gap. There is a need to examine because of this recent decline. And we know enthusiastic teachers and good student results are often linked. So the last sentences shows how the gap or the niche will be filled. The purpose of this study was to examine whether the enthusiasm in the classroom management, and then the paper will go on to show how it does this. But in the first 4 sentences, we have identified, created, and filled the research. So this is one technique that you can use during your writing. So I'm now going to pass it back to Michelle.
Okay, so we're going to move back to talking about the parts of a graduate level research paper. We started with abstract, moved along to introduction. And now we're going to talk about the literature review. There are lots of lit reviews that are done in graduate school and lots of lit reviews that are done in professional publications, which you'll see as you start to look at more and more of those articles. And the lit review is pretty much where you are providing a big picture overview of the information that is already professionally out there that's related to your topic. And it's showing, you know, I've done my research, I am well versed on the topic at hand that I am discussing. So within a lit review, you still want to have kind of like a mini paper in there where you have an intro, a quick idea of the topic of the lit review, such as a theme. You want to have a body. This is where you discuss all of your sources. There are different organizational methods you can follow for lit reviews, which we're not going to do a deep dive into today, just because of time purposes. And then draw some conclusions. What have you drawn from reviewing the lit so far, and where might the discussion proceed from there? So, as you can see from the big caution sign on the screen, there is one very specific area where many students kind of stumble when writing lit reviews, especially if they haven't done it before. And that's with understanding the difference between synthesis and summary. So if you go to the next screen, Amy, I'm just going to talk a little bit about these. Summary is really when you just summarize each piece of literature that you've looked at bit by bit and move along that way. A synthesis is where you're really weaving all of the different resources that you have looked at together and talking about how they work together. A lit review has to synthesize, not summarize. So really, like it says on the screen, the most common issue with lit reviews is that they simply summarize. Piece A said this, piece B said this, piece C said this, etc. That's not how you're supposed to do a lit review. Everything really needs to be woven together, showing how all of the existing literature works and kind of speaks to one another. Back to Amy for a moment with a tool.
Yeah, I'm gonna, a little tool to share with you. This is something I would recommend that you start from your very first class. So these are sometimes called graphic organizers, reading organizers. But really what they are is either a Google Sheet or an Excel document where you take notes. So if you look at my example here, each different row is a different article I have read, and each column is something that I was going to be tracking. So let me give you a little close-up here. If we look at my article number 2, you can see that I take various notes. If I make a quote, I put it in quotation marks, and I write down the page numbers. So I can find and remember what I have read. In undergraduate papers, maybe you had to read 2 or 3 or 4 papers per project. But here you might have to read 10, 20, 30, 40 if you're working on your thesis statement or your dissertation or master's level thesis. So it does take time to make more intricate notes, but when your project will span weeks or semesters, doing this is one easy way to find information, because if you look here, like everything in red was a certain topic about identity I was tracking, and all the blue is also related. So I can look by color. I can also click Control Find and look for certain authors or certain terminology points. So I would recommend that you keep a record that has an interface like an Excel document for your research, because at the end of your time, not only will you be able to write papers better, but you'll be able to quickly access it once you're still in your job. This knowledge will be yours forever. And that's the end of our little tool tip. I'm going to pass it back to Michelle.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So a quick note, we're getting some hands raised as we're going along. Please ask your questions in the Q&A. There's a Q&A box at the bottom. You can just click on it and type your question there. And then we are going to be sure to answer all of your questions at the end. So if you have those, please just pop them in that area. Okay, next section of the paper, after you've done abstract, intro, lit review, methodology. This is where you go through the methods of your research, what you did in your research project. You should really detail all the steps of them with the accompanying rationale. So not just I did X, Y, Z like a laundry list, but I did X because blah, blah, blah. And then outline that. They should be presented, of course, in logical order, chronological order if the steps are important, if the time process is important. After methodology, you want to present what you found. So after you did your research, what were the results? You want to be specific about the findings that you discovered. You want to summarize all of them, again, presenting them in logical order. You can include headings and subheadings to kind of organize what you discovered along the way. Discussion. This is really one of the most important parts of a grad research paper, because this is where you kind of do some analysis. You address your research question with reference to the results from your research. You put your findings in context and you interpret your findings. So you are offering your interpretation of what you discovered. You do want to address the limitations of your research. This is super important in grad school, and I have encountered students who don't want to do this because they think if they acknowledge a limitation, it means that their research was unsuccessful or was bad, which is not true. Every piece of research is going to have some sort of a limitation to it. Maybe your research involved a fairly small sample size. That would be a limitation that you would want to address and discuss. You're demonstrating the significance of your findings, new insights, and you're really proving your expertise on the topic. And that's where, you are showing you have synthesized the literature on the topic. You have critically analyzed your own research as you've moved forward. And lastly, conclusion. Again, you probably wrote conclusions in undergraduate papers. In grad papers, you are providing some summary, but not a simple restatement of everything you've done. Really the last two bullets are the most important. What are the implications of the research that you've done? So you've done this big study, what are the implications? And kind of addressing that now what question that Amy mentioned at the beginning, what are some areas for future research? So now that you've done this, what can be done more to move forward? So again, there's just the list, the parts of the research paper. So you'll have these slides in the future, kind of keep these sections in mind generally when you're writing grad level papers. And our last bit here for me and Amy, this notion of a research question. As we mentioned, you do want your research to respond and answer to a question. So you want to think about that at the beginning. What do you want your paper and your research to answer? Some qualities of a good research question. It needs to be fairly narrow. It needs to be something you can handle and address within the scope of whatever type of paper you're writing. It needs to be open-ended enough to warrant research. If you ask a question that just requires, looking up one statistic, that's not open-ended enough to warrant discussion. It does need to answer the so what question, lead toward why is this relevant, why is this important, and it does need to be researchable. You don't want to ask something that you can't actually research and prove. And our last slide here, we're just looking at some examples of research questions. One of these is pretty okay, going in a good direction. One is too broad and one is too narrow. So if we look at number one, what are the most effective cancer treatments? That question is far too broad. You could write many books about many different types of treatments, about many different types of cancers. It's far too broad to address in the scope of one research paper. Number two, how does treatment for cancer vary by ethnicity amongst women in the Bay Area? This is the one that's moving in a better direction. It is researchable. It is narrow enough, or at least getting there. It's a pretty good start. It's open-ended as well. For number 3, what is the 5-year survival rate for women with ovarian cancer in California? This is a research question that wouldn't work well because it is one of those where you can look up this statistic and your question is answered. The research is done. It's not open-ended enough. It doesn't warrant more discussion and research. It's just you look up a number and that's it. Kind of my last general tip about research questions is the how and the why questions tend to be a lot better for research questions because they lend to more open-ended researchable studies. And that is it for this portion with me and Amy.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michelle and Amy. That was wonderful. As I was listening and watching these presentations, it reminded me of back when I first started graduate school. And I remember thinking, holy moly, how am I going to remember all this great stuff? So I just wanted to remind you that this whole session is being recorded. All of these slides and all these great things that we're showing you are also going to be made available to you. And as you'll hear in a little bit, we offer sessions through the Writing Center throughout every single semester on topics like this and all sorts of great workshops. So you don't worry if your head's starting to get full of information. You're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to remember all of this stuff? Next up, we have Steph Frazier and Amy Russo again. Amy's so popular that she is going to be involved in almost every presentation. And they're going to be talking with you a little bit about writing as a multilingual writer as a graduate student at San Jose State. So Steph and Amy, take it away.
All right, thank you, Tom. Yes, hello, everyone. This is the time where I really, really wish we could be in a room together. Unfortunately, we can't. There's so many of you, there's almost 300 of you, because I'd love to see a show of hands of people. Don't do it right now, but I would be able to see a show of hands of people who are coming from another country and perhaps have a different language as their first language. And that is partially who we're talking to during this segment. However, I would also like to point out that before we start, that learning to write in a new discipline is, in a lot of ways, learning to write in a new language, even if you come from English and you're just continuing with English. Sort of like what Tom said earlier on, new genre expectations and conventions in the discipline make it almost like you're learning a new language. So please don't think that this segment here is only about people coming from other languages than English. It really is applicable in a lot of ways to everyone starting graduate school. Very brief outline of what we're going to be talking about in this section. Amy's going to talk about how language is used differently in different contexts, and writing is no different. Writing is also used differently in different contexts. We're going to tell a couple of little stories about cultural differences in writing. And then Amy's also going to offer a couple of tools like she did earlier on the topic of multilingual writing. And yeah, that's basically what we're going to spend the next 15-20 minutes about. So Amy, I believe it's on to you.
Thank you very much, Steph. So I'm actually quite excited because I get to share one of my favorite graphics I've ever found for a slide presentation. So if you will humor me. This is the graphic that I really like when I'm thinking about language use, that we communicate to different kinds of people all the time in our daily lives. Like how you talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend is not the same way as you talk to your teacher or to your mom or to your friend, or if you're trying to like talk smack to a rival basketball team. All of these require different forms of communication in order to kind of meet the expectations of our audience. So like you might tell your girlfriend like, hey babe, how are you doing? This is probably not the same way that you would greet your mom or your teacher. That different words, different grammar structures, even just different topics, like how you sound and what you talk about will likely differ a lot depending on who your communication partners are and what you're trying to communicate. As Steph and Tom and Michelle have all been talking about, writing also has these kind of built-in expectations. Like how you write a mystery novel is not the same way as you write a dating profile or an engineering thesis or a research grant. All of these are really different. So imagine if your mystery novel was written like an engineering master's thesis and you find out in sentence number 3 who committed the murder. Likely as a reader, you'd be going like, what's happening? This is a bad mystery novel. I already have solved the mystery, because our expectations as readers haven't been met. In the same way, if we look at the engineering thesis paper, if we write that like a mystery novel and they're like, does this help treat cancer? I don't know. What do you think? Again, our genre expectations, our reader expectations are not being met. So we likely will not pay as much attention if those expectations aren't attended to. And these rules that Tom talked about can sometimes be invisible unless we deliberately study them. They can be very difficult to learn, but they're key in kind of becoming a graduate writer, in becoming a skilled communicator. I'm going to stop my video here for a second, and I want to tell you a story. So I lived in Japan for 5 years. I both studied and I also worked. And in one of my Japanese classes, I was writing an essay, okay? And I'm pretty good at school at essays, okay? So I was a little, kind of proud of myself. So I wrote an essay just like I would in America. I had my introduction, I had my paragraphs, nice like thesis statement, conclusion. And I'm like, great, I wrote it just like an American college essay, and it's in Japanese. What could be better? Well, my teacher actually pulled me aside at the end of class, and she's like, Amy-san, she's like, there's a problem with your writing. And I was like, she said, when you write like this, it kind of seems rude when you write in this style. She says, you are not respecting the reader. She says, when I read a paper like this, it makes me feel like you think I'm stupid because you have said all of the things. So in Japanese writing, I learned it's much more 50-50 between the reader and the writer, this responsibility both for like understanding, but also for keeping track. But on the other hand, American college essays is completely different. It's 100% the writer's responsibility to be understood. In general, in like, okay, maybe not creative writing, but in like research-based STEM, social studies kinds of writing, it's the writer's job to be clear. And if you haven't been completely clear, then you haven't done your job. You have to keep working. So that was completely different than the Japanese expectations. And what would have been a good American paper was not a good paper in Japan. And that really blew my mind, to be honest, that it could be so different. And those are those readers' expectations, right? Different contexts, different cultures, different languages have different kinds of explanations. And Steph has a great story to continue our topic here.
Yes, thank you, because when Amy and I were talking about that, and Amy told me that story, I was reminded of a student that I had years ago. I have taught English as a second language for longer than I want to mention. And years ago, I had a student from Japan. I was teaching at San Francisco at the time, and he was an international student, had just arrived, and my assignment was a letter of introduction to an employer. And when I read his letter of introduction, my impression of it was that it was very, very humble, too humble, in fact. I think, not to overgeneralize, but I think in American style writing, an American style letters of introduction, you really are, especially to an employer, you really are expected to sell yourself, to talk about how good you are in certain ways. It's not always easy because some people don't really like to talk about themselves too positively. But that was one of the issues that this student had, because I believe in Japan it would have been much more, it would have been, as Amy points out, probably rude to talk about yourself in such positive terms. And so that's a discussion that I had to have with that student in terms of different expectations of the genre in different cultures. That's true not just between international cultures, but again, also between different genres themselves. As you say, mystery novels have a different expectation of your reader than lab reports. Okay, so how do we, what tools do we have to find those expectations, to explore them? Amy's going to talk a little bit more about that now.
Great. So we'll be introducing a few more tools that you can use, again, starting from early in your career. And again, this is really echoing our first presentation, that writing begins actually as readers. So you are already, starting from this orientation, already a part of your academic communities, of your industries, that you are becoming a member that can start contributing. And the first step you do when you're entering or into a new field or learning to specialize further is to really become familiar with the different conversations and interests of that field. So you start collecting good models of writing. So these will likely be conference presentations, published articles, or if you're starting to look for jobs, you'll want to look for successful cover letters and resumes and even like interview tips. So whatever new context you want to write in, whether it's publishing an article, going to a conference, or getting a job, you want to collect those good models to study as a reader and try to reverse engineer. Start at a good example and then work backwards, figure out what they did and how. And one way you can do this, for example, if we have this research article here, you can look at different sentences. You can look for that academic language. So this first sentence begins, this study addresses the gap by focusing on social media networking sites and their networking practices, particularly usage, perceived barriers, and measurement of effectiveness of SNS as a marketing tool. Even from this one sentence, we can learn quite a bit. If we look at this first part, addresses the gap. The gap is a term you will find very often in research. The gap is what's missing or not yet known about a particular research topic. So many papers will use the term gap to show that's the niche or the place they're trying to extend or start a new conversation. So by studying language, we can collect good phrases and good vocabulary that we can deploy when we're beginning to write our own papers. And as Tom and Steph were both saying, writing takes a lot of time and many practices and iterations in order to do this. So again, I'm going to go back to the Excel sheet here, but create some kind of archive of both your notes from articles, but also from just good language that you see. Like, how do people introduce results? How do they talk about their methods? How do they introduce a new article? What you can do is kind of write down your key phrases and then write down what you think the job or the function of that sentence is. And this way your papers can start joining and start understanding those kind of invisible rules of genre, which will help make your ideas really strong and easy to understand in that particular context. Because as Steph was saying, context matters. And a great place you can do this and get help with this is at the Writing Center. You can have individual one-on-one appointments. We also have many specialized workshops and also handouts, including many that are attached to the module for where you will find these videos. I encourage you to look at them all and also to make those individual 45 online minute appointments with us this very semester. I'm going to pass it back to Steph here.
Yes, thank you. And our final slide is going to talk about a couple of other suggestions that I personally have that have already been mentioned, and I'm really reiterating what Tom has already said and what Michelle and Amy have already explained, and that's just the suggestion number one: Well, the general suggestion, talk with your professor. Take advantage of office hours and go there as often as you can. Keeping in mind that, everyone's busy, you're busy, your professor is busy, and so on. So, be mindful if there's someone else waiting outside the door that, you can't have all the time in the world. But if you go often with pointed questions each time, you're going to get a different insight each time. And also with your regular professors, take time out during those office hours to talk about writing expectations specifically. Not, you're obviously going to talk about content if you're in chemistry or in business or in education or something like that. But try to take, 5 or 10 minutes each time to talk specifically about, well, what is it about the writing that you would like to see, and that the field in general is accustomed to seeing. In other words, third bullet point, know your audience. If you're writing a paper for a class, is your audience your professor? Is it the other students in the class, your colleagues in class? Or is it someone else? Ask that question directly. Who is my audience? And with other types of things, dissertations and theses and lab reports, figure out who your audience is and learn how to tailor your writing specifically to that audience. And most importantly, just find out from basically who the boss is in each one of your classes, and that is your professor, about what they expect. That and many other questions can also be answered, as we have said, at the Writing Center, or it can be addressed at least at the Writing Center. And so then I think Michelle is going to do a little bit of sales job about what the Writing Center can offer you. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Steph. So I'm going to share my screen here. And just show you a few slides about the Writing Center services and what we can offer. We are here to support you, even during these crazy virtual times of COVID-19. So let me get this going here. I just gotta move the annoying little Zoom box. Okay, so the Writing Center. We are a support service that exists on campus. We serve all students at SJSU. We are open whenever classes are in session. That does include, there's a winter session, there's a summer session. We are open and there to help you. Our website's listed there along with our general email address. We do offer online virtual services, which we have expanded significantly since the pandemic started. So we do offer online tutoring sessions via Zoom. Those include evening hours until 9 p.m. for those of you who have full-time jobs. We have times that hopefully will accommodate you. We also started a new Ask a Tutor live chat service in collaboration with the library. So when you have a quick question, we have tutors available and there to answer those questions for you during certain times that are posted on our website. We are going to be offering, I think it's a full slate of 25 workshops via Zoom during this fall semester on all kinds of writing topics, from things that do relate to grammar, to how to structure body paragraphs and introductions, to making sure you understand the differences between plagiarism and paraphrasing. We also have a lot of online resources that you can use anytime for your own self-study. So we have a slew of handouts, we have a whole bunch of videos, we have an official blog where you can read through all of our entries. We do have 2 in-person locations that will be closed during fall 2020, but hopefully, since I'm hoping we will eventually enter a post-COVID era and we will be at these in-person locations again, I wanted to at least let you know about them. We're on the 2nd floor of the library, and we do have a location in Clark Hall, which is where we do our drop-in sessions. So what do? Our goal is to enhance the writing skills of SJSU students so they can communicate clearly. The biggest thing to know about tutoring, it's a collaborative experience in which the student and the tutor are both engaged. We don't just proofread or edit something for you. Proofreading or editing, that is when you give me your paper, I mark it up, and then I give it back to you. That's not what we do at the Writing Center. We engage in tutoring. And the goal is always to improve you as a writer, not to simply improve this one piece of paper that you're working on today. We work with writers, all disciplines, all grade levels, during all phases of the writing process. We help with any piece of writing. So this can be anything you're writing for a class, obviously. But also, you know, when you're writing resumes and cover letters and you're trying to get a job, when you're writing a personal statement, trying to get a scholarship, we are here to support all of that. Our tutors, we do follow a peer tutoring model. So that means any tutor you work with is going to be another student. We hire sophomores all the way up through grad students. They all go through the same very rigorous training program before they're officially hired and working with students. So they all go through knowledge-based pedagogical training, so they learn how to explain things to other people. Multilingual learner training with Amy. We go through best practices, lots of observations, role-playing, training continues at monthly meetings, and we do some specialized training about tutoring online, which we're all doing now, and working with graduate level writers. So the tutor that you end up working with, they will have all gone through this same universal training that equips them to work with you. So services we offer students. So again, since we're operating online only for the fall, you can get 2 45-minute online tutoring sessions a week, and you can get a third one available upon request for graduate students. So you email our main address there, writingcenter@sjsu.edu, and you can get started with asking for that additional third session. The 2 sessions you can just schedule on your own each week. I had mentioned Ask a Tutor live chat, so you can get help with quick questions through that anytime that we're open, of course. And then usually we also offer in-person tutoring sessions and in-person drop-ins as well. All those resources online, our full slate of workshops. We offer special programs such as writing retreats. We also have a Practically Speaking special program that helps students improve their public speaking skills. Amy can speak to that later. And we offer some writing contests as well. So the last thing I wanted to go over before we open up to Q&A is some tutoring myths and myths about writing centers and tutoring in general, meaning that these are not true, but these are misconceptions that people often come in with. So the first one I talked about, that writing center tutors will edit, proofread, or revise your papers for you. Again, the goal of tutoring is to teach you concepts about writing so you become a better writer yourself. Another common misconception is that tutors can only help with grammar. Also untrue. We do help with grammar, absolutely, all the time. But we also help with like content idea development, organization. You can come in with having nothing written, and our tutors will help you through a brainstorming session to get you started. Writing tutors will ensure that every error is corrected in a piece of student writing. Again, not true. You know, you have a 45-minute online session. You're probably not going to get through your whole paper if you bring in, even if you bring in a 10-page paper, let alone like a 50-page start to your thesis. But the goal isn't to get through the whole paper. The goal is you cover concepts with the tutor that you can then try to apply on your own to the rest of your writing. Students need to have a writing product already completed before a visit to a tutor. Again, not true. You can come in with nothing other than an assignment that you need to do, and we'll help you get started. Only students from English or writing classes can visit the Writing Center. That's a common misconception, you know, thinking, oh, I can only come from my English class. That's not accurate. You can come in with anything. And like I said, it could be professional writing you're doing for a job or a prospective job. This is another common one, especially for the population that we're talking to right now. This belief that some graduate students have that undergraduate tutors can't help me because they're not graduate students. Not true. Like I said, all of our tutors go through the same training processes, and we've had undergraduate tutors complete our training about working with graduate level writers. So they are knowledgeable about the type of writing that you'll be doing at the grad level. And lastly, we are usually hiring, and a common misconception is that only students majoring in English can be writing center tutors. That is inaccurate. We love to hire tutors from all across the disciplines. And right now, actually, I mean, of our 21 or 22 tutors, we only have a handful of English majors. We want to have people from engineering, from the sciences, from all across campus, because they bring in, you know, disciplinary specific knowledge about writing, which is very useful as well. So that's the end of my overview about the Writing Center. I think we're going to Tom and Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Michelle, and also thank you, Steph and Amy. And before we get to the Q&A, I will give you a round of applause to all the fabulous panelists, because I know everybody out there on the webinar is busy cheering, and I wanted you to at least get a sense of what that's like. We have a good 20-25 minutes available for Q&A. So what we're going to do is, for those of you who've typed in a question on our little Q&A function, Julia Dunn is going to read them aloud, and then I will point at somebody and have them answer it for you. So if anybody on the panel looks like they're falling asleep, I will direct the question to you first. Also, if any new questions occur to any of you who are watching the webinar as we're talking, please feel free to type in more questions into the Q&A. We will get to all the questions in one form or another. Either we'll answer it live on screen, or we will answer it as a chat in the Q&A function, but we will get to everything. So I will ask Julia to, I guess, give us our first questions.
Hang on one second. This is Cheryl. Julia, before you get started, why doesn't everybody turn on their mic so they can go ahead and pitch in really quickly once Tom has got pointed at them and suggested that they do that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. This is Julia Dunn from the College of Graduate Studies again. I will be reading our first question here. So if a student is reaching out to a professor for writing examples to help them determine style, length, paragraph structure, etc. for their own work, how would you recommend the student phrase their question so it's clear to the professor that they're not trying to look for an example to copy? Essentially, how can students ask for examples while being clear that they don't want to be academically dishonest in doing so?
I think that is an excellent question for Professor Steph Frazier.
Thank you. I was dying to answer it. And it is a really good question. I think most people, if you phrase it in exactly the manner that you wrote it in the chat box, in the QA box, and in the way it was just read, most people are going to be reasonable and understand that. Look, I'm looking for style suggestions. I'm really wanting to emulate style. I'm not trying to copy or too closely imitate. I promise. And, you know, generally, I think people are going to be reasonable about that. Now, in the case of class papers from prior students in prior classes, that might be a little trickier because professors can't just give out someone's paper from a prior class. They would have had to ask for permission for that from the student in that class. So if they don't, you know, if they didn't do that and they don't have it for you, then, you know, you're not going to be able to use someone's prior paper as a sample. In that case, I think, you know, I would say, you know, I would respond saying, I understand that we don't have any prior samples. Can we therefore go through and just talk about some of the specific style expectations that you have, style and content expectations that you have, so that we can cover some of those bases without the actual samples? So those are some suggestions. And again, going to the Writing Center and having them help out also. If it's published work, that's a lot easier because you can just go look at already published samples and then use that in conjunction with other people in a study group or with your professor and talk about conventions that you see there. So I'm hoping that answered your question.
Great, thank you. How and when should a student request writing support? If the deadline for an essay submission, for instance, is maybe 10 days from now, how many days prior should a student request support, and what information should they provide when asking for help?
That sounds like a perfect question for the director of the Writing Center, Michelle.
Hi, so yeah, appointments online, you can schedule them yourself. You can schedule those 2 45-minute sessions per week. You can schedule them up to 7 days in advance. So I generally tell students, think about scheduling about a week in advance of when you know that you need to have it done at least. Earlier is better. And like I said, you don't have to have anything done. And when you schedule an appointment, you do fill out a form where you'll give some basic starting information to your tutor. And here's what I'm bringing in. Here's what I have so far about how long it is. Here's what class it's for, stuff like that.
Great. Some students are wondering if there is a template available for the graphic organizer research spreadsheet. Maybe Amy, perhaps you could speak to that.
We don't currently have one up. I would be happy to provide a template for you that I can make sure that Julia can post on this module. But also, even if you do get and use a template, remember that templates have to fit the kind of research that you are doing. So the things that I was tracking were important to me are maybe not what will be important for your research. So basically, just think about it that each row is an article, yes, but each column is something that you particularly want to track. For example, one student I was working with was looking at one kind of educational intervention technique. Her context was high school, but this was more often used in elementary. So one of her columns was just, is this high school or is it elementary school? And she just put she just put an H or an E. So think about personalizing it, but I will make the template available though. Thank you,
Amy. Does the Writing Center offer an evaluation so that students can find out about their current writing capabilities, weaknesses, etc., of the students to bridge the gap later, sort of a self-assessment tool to assess their writing strength?
Sounds like a perfect question for Michelle again.
That's an excellent question. We do not currently offer any assessment tools like that. I believe that some do exist online, which we could probably look into and find some good ones to recommend, but we in-house do not offer that.
There's another question in the same vein. Like the Writing Center, is there any center or resource available for ESL students to improve public speaking?
This sounds like a wonderful question for Amy.
So we do have several resources on campus to help with public speaking. So now these are not only for English as a second language students, but they are inclusive of this group. I would like to recommend a few, and I'll kind of end with the one that I do. So on campus to begin with, we have the Communication Center, or Comm Center for short. So the Comm Center can help you with writing a speech or presentation. Like maybe you have to give one for class with slides and you want someone to listen and give you feedback on that individual presentation that you're doing. The Comm Center, like the Writing Center, has tutors. So you can sign up for free appointments, and you can find their center by, I would recommend just Googling SJSU Comm Center appointment, and I'll bring you straight to their website. So that's the first. The second resource is a general organization called Toastmasters International, which is an international group that has clubs all over the States and honestly all over the world that helps people practice public speaking, both prepared and impromptu. We actually have a Toastmasters club on campus called Spartan Toastmasters, and they meet on Monday evenings, and they are meeting during COVID. Their meetings are online. So I would really recommend to reach out to that group, because practicing with peers and getting feedback is how you get better at public speaking. So that's your second tool. And finally, number 3, I will talk to you about what I do. So once a semester, I run an impromptu public speaking seminar to help people learn how to speak when they have no time for preparation. So this isn't like presentation or prepared speeches. This is how do you speak off the cuff. My seminar is called Practically Speaking. It will be meeting starting in October. So if you are interested in impromptu speaking, I would recommend you to please apply. It happens every semester. So again, just to recap, there is the Comm Center for prepared speeches and presentations, one-on-one appointments. There's general public speaking with Toastmasters in general. And on our campus, we have Spartan Toastmasters, and you can Google to find their club. And finally, there's practical speaking if you're looking for more general impromptu public speaking practice. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Will a graduate student requesting tutoring service from the Writing Center be paired with a graduate student?
Obviously, Michelle.
So I didn't know if you wanted to kick it to me officially. So when you sign up for appointments online, you sign up for them yourselves. On our website and within the scheduling system, you can see bios of all of our tutors. So you can see if they are a graduate student, and you can choose to meet with other graduate students if you want. Like I said in my presentation though, generally our undergrads are really well trained as well. And they go through training about working with grad level writers in many cases. So usually it's okay to work with an undergrad as well.
Thanks. Another student is asking about thesis statements. They say, I often struggle with a thesis statement. What advice do you have in navigating through this?
Interesting question. Should we throw that to Amy? Or Steph?
You want that one, Steph?
I mean, that is an interesting question, because I'm guessing you might get different answers from different people. I mean, should I give this answer? My answer is a little complicated. I mean, not every paper is going to have a thesis statement. There's different kinds. There's genres that don't, like a lab report, for example, doesn't have a thesis statement. A larger research report might have a statement of its major findings, and maybe definitely its research questions, but I wouldn't consider one of those as having a thesis statement. I think of thesis statements as being something in an opinion piece, or more of a expository writing piece. And in those cases, getting to a thesis statement is a matter of, figuring out what your actual point is. And it can indeed be challenging. I think the best way of getting at that, myself, not everyone is the same, but myself, is talking to people and trying to put into words, just verbally, what it is that I'm trying to say, and having that person react to it, and then gauging from their reaction if I'm being clear enough, and if not, trying it again different ways, and also doing that in writing. I think, once again, going back to earlier suggestions, talking to your instructor as to how they feel your point is coming across is probably, and also your classmates, is probably the best way of figuring out how your thesis statements are working. So that's a long answer to a question that is a complicated one.
Agree.
Great,
Anything?
thank you.
Yes.
Anyone else want to comment on that question?
Sure, I'll roll one more marble across the screen for you to think about. And Steph is right. Knowing the kinds of expectations that readers have is really important to know what is the correct kind of writing to be doing in that moment. But as a very, very general statement, I can offer you a simple model. A thesis statement often will contain the topic, the claim, and then the points of the paper in kind of a one-sentence summary. This is particularly true if a kind of a standard like undergraduate essay that doesn't have sections. So there's like one thesis for the whole paper. So an example might be like fast food workers suffer some kinds of stress-related problems, both mentally and physically. So the topic here would be fast food workers or work environment, then the claim is that they get problems or affected by stress. So that's a claim. It's an opinion. It's like a fact. It's something I have to prove. It's not a fact. The points that I would explore in my paper would be mental and health problems. So that kind of previews that's what I'll talk about before I wrap up and I make an argument. I have to make a claim and try to get you, the reader, to agree with me. So topic, claim, and points is a simplified general model that you might be able to use in addition to the contextual expectations. Thank you.
Another student writes, I am an international student and I still have a hard time expressing my ideas in English. Is it okay that I request a tutoring session with the Writing Center to learn to develop and express ideas more comfortably in English without having any assignments coming up necessarily?
I think that's a great question for Michelle.
Michelle.
I'm coming, thank you. I still do that sometimes. So yes, you can make an appointment with a tutor without having any specific assignment to work on. I always suggest do bring in some sample of your writing, whatever that looks like. It can be an email or a cover letter you wrote for a job, something you did as an undergrad, to give the tutor kind of a sense of how you write. And then you can kind of look through it together and talk about some of the weak areas that you feel come up in your writing and how to tackle them and talk about them. So yes.
Thanks, Michelle. Some students are interested in potentially tutoring for the Writing Center. They would like to know, when can you apply to be a tutor for the Writing Center? Can we apply to tutor in the first semester?
So usually we are always hiring, but we did a lot of hiring this summer. So if you visit our website now, you will see that applications are currently closed. We do expect to reopen applications probably in October because we have a few tutors graduating in December who we will want to replace. We are also hiring a few more tutors in conjunction with the College of Graduate Studies, specifically to work with grad students. So you will be seeing a message at some point from the Grad Studies Dean about that, where we are hiring a few special ones coming up. And you can absolutely apply in your first semester.
Will in-person tutoring sessions only return if in-person classes resume the following semester?
That's an excellent question. And as with most things COVID, we can't say for sure what's coming in the spring. So far, we have been kind of following the practices that have been going on for classes. So because classes are still primarily going to be online, we're still online. So it just depends on the trends and what happens in the spring, which we just don't know yet.
Another student mentions, our start date for fall semester is the 19th of August. When can we start scheduling appointments? And can we have introductory sessions with the tutors?
Sure. So we open for tutoring on August 24th. You can schedule appointments 1 week in advance. So starting the week that school begins, the week of the 19th, you can hop into our system, get registered, and start seeing what's available. And you can register in our system through our website anytime. You could do that today if you want.
Someone else writes, do any of the panelists have their own self-editing checklists they have used or use for research papers, grant writing, etc.? And are the panelists willing to share their personal checklists with the audience?
Wow, I think that's a good question that all of us could answer. I'll begin by saying that no, I actually don't have any sort of formalized checklist. My answer is going to sound a lot like Steph's previous answer about thesis statements, and it all depends on the project and how I feel about the project at the time. It depends what my checklist might look like, but I actually don't have something like that. We'll ask Amy and then Steph and then Michelle. Same question.
I don't personally have like one list that I use only, but a tool that I will use is trying to listen to my paper. So sometimes I will take my paper and read it aloud. So I can sometimes hear errors better than I can spot them, or like if something doesn't logically connect. There are also on both PC and Mac different programs you can get to have your computer read to you. I particularly like to, I usually write in Google Documents, and there are different like Chrome extensions that you can find, and they're called text to speech. The one I use is called Read Aloud, so I can listen to what I'm reading. Or sometimes I find I have to change medium. So instead of like correcting on the computer screen, I'll print it out and I'll make ideas on paper and then move back. So sometimes switching up medium can help me.
Excellent. Steph?
I love that, listening to your paper, because that's the way I go about it too. I don't have anything preset, but every time because as Tom mentioned also, each paper and each assignment is going to be a different experience. But what I do in general is while I'm writing, and as we all know, your first draft is always going to be awful. As you're writing it, you know it's awful. So while I'm writing it and things occur to me about something I need to check later on, you know, I'll take out my legal pad and take a note. And again, each time I think of something that I need to check later, that helps me continue to write without freaking out. Right now, I don't have to check it right now. I can wait until a little bit later, but it also gives me a task to do for once my first draft is finished. And then just basically going through the paper over and over and over again, each time with a slightly different focus. Okay, this time I'm going to look for, look to make sure I'm consistent in my point over the pages. This time I'm going to look for grammar errors, and this time I'm going to, so isolating different focuses for each time we read it. I think keeping things organized that way, keeping a list of your own specific questions to yourself is an effective way for many people.
And Michelle?
I also do not have kind of a standard checklist that I use, so we all have that in common. I will say two things. So the first one is just, we do have a handout available on the Writing Center website that's about self-editing techniques. It includes, reading aloud. So that way you just kind of get a big picture overview of the different ways that you can go about editing effectively. And the other thing that I always recommend to students is know your own issues. So that way you're looking for them specifically. And that could be from feedback you've gotten from tutors, from instructors, whomever. But know what your own weaker areas are. I know that I'm terrible at writing any sort of conclusion to anything. So that's the area I pay more attention to. For people who know they write fabulous conclusions, they don't need to focus on it as much as I would. Things like that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you everyone. And we are getting near the end of our session. So I'd like to first say that if we didn't get to your question live, we will answer your question in the chat before we officially log off. So all the questions will get answered. I also want to remind everyone that the slides from these presentations, as well as the full recording, will be made available to you. And also throughout the coming semester and the entire year, there's going to be a lot of workshops that are going to be offered through the Writing Center, and tutoring is always offered through the Writing Center. So if you remember one address from today's meeting, it's www.sjsu.edu/Writing Center, all one word. And all this stuff is going to be available. That is the place, the hub for you to find all these wonderful resources to support you as a writer while you're here on campus. Before I hand it back to Cheryl and Julia for kind of the final wrap up, I want to thank all the panelists for joining me today and taking time from your secret and remote locations to join us for this Zoom webinar. Thank you very much for being with us. Also, thank you so much to Cheryl and Julia, who really organized this and put it all together and have provided wonderful technical support for us to make this webinar work. This is the very first time that I've done something this big on Zoom, and you two made it work flawlessly, and I really appreciate it. And finally, thank you to all of you who joined us today, and welcome to San Jose State. This is kind of a weird semester to be joining us, but we really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And we look forward to meeting you and seeing you in person when we're all back on campus, hopefully sometime next year, and perhaps seeing some of you virtually in our courses. So before we say goodbye, I'll hand it back to Cheryl and Julia for any last minute things.
Tom, this is Cheryl and the students. Yes, we are at the end of the webinar. We can extend it. The question I have for you so that students do know is, are we going to answer the remaining questions right now as we're sitting here, or were you planning to reach out to the students at a later date?
Hadn't thought about that. The panelists, would you like to just quickly knock them out in the next 5 minutes?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer a couple of, I think most of them are about services at the Writing Center. Of course, that gives Amy and Michelle most of the work. But,
the reason I ask is I can't get this recorded for the benefit of other students if I don't have my captioner with me. So
yes,
that's the reason.
Yeah, we would be happy to answer the questions briefly now.
Yeah, and so if Julia wants to maybe just read them out loud to us, we'll just boom, 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 and get through them.
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Does the Writing Center have Chinese version resources or resources in other languages?
Michelle.
We do not currently offer resources in other languages.
What is the name of the Toastmaster group in SJSU?
It is called Spartan Toastmasters. So like SJSU is the Spartan, so Spartan Toastmaster.
Will the tutors tell us what's wrong with a specific portion of a research paper, such as does it make sense, is this coherent, in a particular section, such as body paragraph or the intro, as an example?
Sure, absolutely. When you schedule a session, you kind of indicate what you generally want to focus on, being that grammar, content, organization, formatting, whatever. And then the tutor will try to stay focused in that area. And if it is like content development about like a body paragraph, they'll certainly tell you, you know, if it isn't quite making sense, and then help you improve upon it.
Thanks, Michelle. How do we meet our peers if we physically don't go to school? Because if we don't connect, how do we form this unique peer group for writing? What is your suggestion as to how to do that, how to connect in this crisis?
I could take that one. One thing I would recommend for doing that is some of your initial classes that you'll be taking your first semester would be a good place to start. So some of the other students who are in your courses, see if they'd like to work with you in some sort of writing group, because the odds are they're going to be taking similar courses and doing similar projects throughout their time in a graduate school with you. You might also ask this question to your initial instructors, because I think a number of departments, individual departments on campus, are thinking about this. So I know in the English department, for example, we're going to be doing our best to kind of get these students, you know, into these, I think it was like this weird social situations where we can chat with each other, at least virtually, to start making some connections and to form these types of student groups.
Thanks, Tom. Another student writes, how can one choose a research paper topic that you don't end up going off topic or being all over the place? Any advice or tools?
I just answered that in the text, and then when I hit type, when I hit submit, it disappeared, so I can't find my answer, but it's in there. Chioma asked it, and I mean, I could paraphrase it briefly. It's showing your work to others is, I think, always the best way of getting feedback as to, well, your point, how well you're making your point, and also if you're going off topic. I would suggest, if possible, forming writing groups in your major, so people who know your content well and are willing to get together to share papers, and you can do the same for them. You read their papers and give them your honest assessment, and that helps a lot in getting people in making you understand if you're staying on topic and if you're making your point well.
Thank you. Looks like we're done.
I think Amy wanted to add to that.
I just wanted to add to Steph's from my own experience as a student. I was able to the first semester I wasn't really able to find any writing groups, but then I kind of figured out the secret during my second semester was that some person has to be the leader, the schedule maker, who actually invites other people and kind of sets it up. And not a lot of people will do that, but if this is something you really want, like I did, take the initiative to reach out to people and set times. for meeting together, and others and yourself will be really thankful that you did, would be my advice.
A good idea to use spell check or grammar check tools available online for academic writing.
I'll be happy to take this one. Exercise caution, I guess, would be my biggest overall recommendation. Spell check is usually fine and helpful. Grammar check, though, I write a whole bunch of things and it'll say fragment, consider revising, and I'm like, nope, I know that's not a fragment. I know it's okay. So really exercise caution. You have to know a lot about grammar already to kind of suss out if their suggestions are good and accurate or not. So it's helpful for more advanced writers only, I think.
Agreed. Do not trust it entirely. Know someone else to ask also. It can give you hints, but it's not going to answer your questions. And I've seen too many people over rely on grammar checks.
Thank you both. Coming to grad school after almost 20 years of being a stay-at-home mom, do you have any advice, links, or workshops, etc., for transitioning to writing papers online on Google Docs or Word Docs, etc.?
I think that would be more of a question probably for eCampus and IT, because they might have resources that are more on the tech side of things.
One idea I might be able to offer is if you want to learn a new kind of tool, say like Google Documents or Google Slides, often what I do is just go to YouTube and type in the name of the program I want to use and like how to or guide. And there are often like short 10, 20-minute videos that introduce new tools, because I promise you are not the only person who has to learn new software right now. And there will be hundreds of videos that you can look for to help you kind of integrate into this new kind of writing.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Just a note to all the attendees, we are going to be capping the questions now for this webinar, but if you do have more questions, you can email the Writing Center or the College of Graduate Studies after this point. We do have two more questions quickly, or one more question. English is my second language. Does Writing Center have extra help for English second language graduate students? And they're also wondering what workshop is.
Okay, so workshops are 1 hour, like a one-off class, if you will, that lasts for 1 hour virtually this fall on a certain writing topic. You'll be attending with up to 15 other students, and you'll have a facilitator who is teaching you the concept, where you have activities, stuff like that. In regard to extra help for English second language learners, all of our tutors go through training with Amy about working with second language learners. So they're all well versed in that. And as I mentioned, graduate students can request that extra third session every week if they feel like they need more assistance.
Michelle, this is Cheryl. Can I just follow that up really quickly? A student had asked, it was probably answered online. How are students notified of these workshops? Do they just need to keep accessing the Writing Center? How do you get word to the students, or is it their responsibility to find out?
So our workshop schedule is fully posted on our website. We're going to also post it on the SJSU, the new events calendar that they rolled out. We're going to have all the workshops available there. There's also all posted in our online scheduling system. We promote it. We have a student listserv. So if you wanted to sign up for that through our website, you could get emails about all of our upcoming events. We do it through all of our social media outlets, so Instagram, Twitter, all of that.
Thank you very much. All right, I want to thank all of the panelists today. Jillian, I appreciate your help. We're going to wrap the webinar up now, and for anybody still online, we want to let you know that this is recorded, it is closed caption, and it will be up in the writing module part of your Canvas class, Welcome to Graduate School, probably within the next few days. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone.
Bye-bye.